The case of Jessica Lane Chambers, which serves as a reminder from time to time, acts as a dreadful reminder of the juxtaposition of cruel reality within the relatively tranquil city of Cortland. This is a disturbing reminder. It is important to keep this instance in mind. The juxtaposition that is being addressed is demonstrated by this particular situation, which serves as an illustration. Maintaining a constant awareness of the incident in question is essential at all times. At first glance, it would appear that the town of Cortland, which is located in the middle of Panola County, is a location that boasts features that are in stark contrast to one another, with the backdrop of a town that is being characterized by its citizens who are resilient and upstanding. The shadows of gang violence and illegal commerce hang large against the backdrop of the town. All of these shadows are hanging in one particular region. These monstrous creatures cast enormous shadows over this town, which is a location where they hang in colossal proportions. On the other hand, the people who reside in the town are the ones who are accountable for defining the town of the town. Due to the sad event that occurred in the city of Cortland on December 6, 2014, the name of Jessica Lane Chambers will be permanently etched into the annals of the city's history. This will be the case because of the unfortunate event. In perpetuity, this will be the situation. Consequently, this will be the case as a result of the catastrophic event that had place. It was the notification of emergency services about a vehicle fire that was burning on a rural road that heralded the beginning of a series of events that would eventually unveil a story that would eventually be exceedingly unpleasant or frightening to the viewer. This notification served as the starting point for the series of events that were to follow. After a predetermined length of time had passed, the story would finally move forward in a manner that was profoundly unsettling to the audience. When rescue workers arrived, they were greeted with a Kia Rio that was completely engulfed in flames and was billowing smoke like a terrible portent. However, the Kia Rio was still burning. These were the events that they saw unfold before their eyes. The scene was revolting to behold in its entirety. One could use words to convey the horrifying scene that took place. During the course of the investigation, it was discovered that Jessica Lane Chambers was lying on the ground at the time that the fire started. During the course of the investigation, information like this was uncovered. Even though her body had been completely scorched, it nevertheless gave the impression of being a live corpse that had emerged from the depths of hell. This was the case despite the fact that her body had been severely charred. Her body had sustained a considerable degree of damage as a result of the burns that she sustained. In the beginning, there was a surge of activity that was both frantic and urgent. This was the initial response. In the course of the firefighters' efforts to put out the fire and save Jessica, this surge in activity took place throughout the duration of their efforts. As soon as they were finished, Jessica was only wearing her panties. Her entire body was burnt, and her hair had turned to ash. Furthermore, she was just wearing her underwear. Each and every one of these things was the result of the efforts that they put forth. Because of their achievements, which ultimately led to the realization of the situation, this dreadful reality became obvious as a direct result of their contributions. Jessica gave off the sense that she was rather difficult to identify. This was the impression that she gave off. Jessica made a desperate attempt to summon assistance in the final moments of her life, but her words were hardly audible over the roaring flames from which she was attempting to beg for relief. She was in the final seconds of her life. These were the final moments of her life that she was able to share with her. In spite of her best efforts, she was unable to prevent her own death from occurring. As a result of the community being confronted with a photograph that depicted a picture of misery that was beyond description, the community was left reeling in shock and dismay to the point that they were rendered speechless. The spectacle depicted a picture of sorrow that was incomprehensible and defied any and all attempts to explain things and provide explanations. Jessica Lane Chambers, the major character in a horrific tragedy that occurred in Cortland, had a past that was distinguished by adversity and complexity during her formative years. This was the case since she was the primary participant in the catastrophe. It was because of this background that she was able to have a challenging and more complicated upbringing. There is no denying the fact that both of these factors contributed to the horrible circumstances that she came from. This event took place at the period of her life when she was developing into an adult. It was during this time that she was maturing. Jessica's childhood was spent in the middle of Cortland, and as a result, she was exposed to the difficulties that are often associated with the disordered topography of the city. At a time in her life when she was gradually becoming into an adult, she was confronted with these difficulties. In spite of the fact that Jessica was brought up in a home atmosphere that was fraught with turmoil, she began to struggle with her own personal issues from a very young age. The fact that she was brought up in those conditions did not change the fact that she did this. On the other hand, this was the circumstance, despite the fact that she had been brought up in a safe home. Jessica was thought to have a steely spirit and an incredible ability for tenacity, despite the challenges that she went through during her entire life and had to conquer. Throughout her entire life, this was the most consistent pattern. The fact that this was the case throughout the course of her life was revealed to be the case. Her upbringing, which was rather similar to the upbringings of a great number of other individuals in her region, was one that was full with difficulties. She had a childhood that was very similar to the childhoods of a great number of other individuals. Her formative years were marked by insurmountable obstacles. This included her own involvement, as well as her own connection with illegal businesses and local gangs, as well as her father's run-ins with the law. Additionally, these challenges included her own personal involvement. Additionally, her father was involved in these challenges as well. In addition, her grandfather was involved in the activities that are coming under scrutiny. Jessica was held in high esteem by a significant number of others, and she was admired by them as a consequence of the outstanding qualities that she possessed. Jessica was regarded with a great deal of respect. Even though there was a lot of pandemonium going on, this was still happening. Those who had the good fortune to have known her were left with an impression that would stay with them for the rest of their lives as a result of her kind smile and compassionate disposition. The sad situation that took place on December 6, 2014, led Jessica's family to be thrust into a cyclone of grief and uncertainty. There is no doubt that the occurrence was directly responsible for this result. The reaction that they delivered was a reflection of the shock that was resonating throughout the entirety of the community of Cortland as they fought to come to terms with the death of one of their own family members as a result of circumstances that could not be explained. As a result of the fact that her funeral was elevated to the level of a solemn event that was attended by hundreds of people, it is instantly clear that she had a big impact on the people who were closest to her. The reason for this is because her funeral was treated as a solemn occasion from the very beginning. As a result of the seriousness of the situation and the widespread attention that it garnered from the general public, law enforcement agencies moved quickly to initiate an investigation into the matter. This was an immediate reaction to the situation that had arisen. Even though they put in a lot of effort to study the subject, the initial stages of the investigation were hampered by a lack of clues and a flutter of theories. This was the case despite the fact that they were making a lot of effort. Although they were making an effort, the fact that this was the scenario did not change the reality that they were succeeding. This was the exact situation that they found themselves in, and the fact that they made an effort to discover answers did not change the fact that they were in this situation. Although a large number of proposals were presented, none of them were able to provide answers that could be regarded as conclusive. This is despite the fact that there were a lot of suggestions. These possibilities encompassed a wide variety of outcomes, ranging from accidental causes to intentional arson. Despite the fact that they are not aware of the circumstances that surround the tragedy that involved Jessica, Jessica's family, and the community as a whole, are searching for justice with all of their strength. This is a consequence of an event that has occurred. During the course of the investigation into the heinous murder of Jessica Lane Chambers, the authorities painstakingly recreated the last few days of Jessica Lane Chambers' life while simultaneously investigating the circumstances that surrounded her passing. Consequently, in order to accomplish this objective, they conducted an investigation into the information that was stored on the mobile phone and carried out a comprehensive review of the surveillance film in an effort to find the answers. The investigation was carried out with the purpose of shedding light on the chain of occurrences that led up to her dying and identifying the individuals who are most likely to be responsible for her departure from this world to the next. When compared to the numerous leads and pieces of evidence that were being studied as part of the investigation, the name of Quentin Tellis came out as being particularly pertinent. He was the subject of the investigation that was being carried out at the time. Throughout the course of the investigation that was being carried out, it was discovered that Tellis was a person of interest. The reason for this was due to the fact that he was related to Jessica, in addition to the circumstantial evidence that surrounds the conversations that took place between the two of them. Nevertheless, in order to establish a compelling case against Tellis, the investigators had to deal with the complexity and gaps in the material that they had obtained throughout the course of their inquiry at various points in time. The fact that this was the case provided a number of fundamental obstacles that needed to be conquered. In the days leading up to the day that marked the beginning of the first trial in 2017, which was a significant turning point in the case had reached a significant impasse. Because of this, the case reached a crucial turning point in its progression, and stalemate had been reached in the investigation in the time leading up to that point, which was a significant point. In the aftermath of the presentation of evidence, the hearing of testimony, and the presentation of evidence, the individual members of the jury were provided with the chance to conduct an investigation into the particular components of the case that were in dispute. The trial was hampered by misunderstanding regarding the directions that were provided to the jury when they were being presented, despite the fact that this was the case. As a direct result of the fact that the trial was declared a mistrial, the pursuit of justice was left in a state of uncertainty as a later consequence. This led to the trial being declared a mistrial, which was the result of the situation. There were a huge number of different aspects of Jessica's life that were probed in a manner that was rather intense throughout the course of the trial. With considerable attention to detail, each of these facets was investigated. Not only did these traits encompass her relationships, but they also contained the chain of circumstances that ultimately led to her passing because they contained the order of events. During the time that forensic evidence and expert testimony were attempting to piece together the events that took place on that very tragic evening, witnesses provided particular recollections of their experiences with Jessica and Quentin Tellis when they were being interviewed. This was done in order to help piece together the events that took place. There was a comprehensive examination of the particulars of these accounts. Furthermore, there were a number of witnesses who each offered their own account of the events that took place. Each of these witnesses was involved in the investigation. Additionally, it is of the utmost significance to realize that the trial, despite the fact that it was a mistrial, was a significant turning point in Jessica Lane Chambers' continued struggle for justice. This is something that must be understood immediately. Bringing anything like this to your attention is something that should be done. At the same time that this underscored the inherent limits that are present in instances of this nature, it also highlighted the issues that law enforcement and legal authorities face when attempting to hold perpetrators of violent actions accountable for their conduct. The terrible tragedy of Jessica Lane Chambers not only reverberated well beyond the confines of Cortland, but it also left a lasting mark on the town and sparked a rush of debate on the nature of justice, the grieving process, and the amount of scrutiny that the media exerts. In addition, the tale left an indelible mark on the community that will never be forgotten. In addition to that, the inquiry into the case of Jessica Lane Chambers left an effect on the community that will not be erased. Jessica Lane Chambers was a young woman who, throughout her whole life, struggled with a range of symptoms related to her mental health. It was a never-ending struggle for her to triumph over these challenges. The first responders who arrived at the scene of Jessica's death had a large amount of mental suffering as a result of their arrival at the scene. This psychological suffering was a direct result of their arrival at the scene. When it came to preventing her death, they were the ones who might be held responsible for their actions. By listening to the testimony that they gave during the actual trial, we were able to get a taste of the horrifying reality that they were forced to face against their will. Jessica was confronted with scenes of unfathomable misery in this world, and she struggled to come to terms with the huge amount of suffering that she had endured in order to arrive at this point in her life. Because of the influence that these circumstances had on these individuals, the permanent scars that are left behind by acts of violence were brought to light, and it served as a clear reminder of the human cost that is demanded by such tragedies. It is impossible to remove any of these scars. This occurred as a result of the fact that these individuals were influenced by the circumstances that they were going through at the time. When the Chambers family, on the other hand, was in the midst of the international grief that was taking place, they came to the knowledge that they were being tormented by rumors and speculation, and that their lives were being exposed to the harsh glare of public scrutiny. This realization occurred during the time when they were in the midst of the international sadness that was taking place. Consequently, they were put through a really difficult experience as a consequence of it. Jessica's family and friends endured a substantial amount of emotional anguish as a direct result of the actions of internet investigators who were driven by an insatiable demand for information. These investigators were motivated by the need to learn more about Jessica. The fact that this made their pain even more extreme and added an additional layer of complication to the problem made an already difficult situation even more difficult. This made the situation even more difficult than it already was previously. The situation became much more challenging as a result of this. Although it was carried out with the best of intentions, the unrelenting quest of truth occasionally descended into sensationalism, which contributed to the amount of misery that the family was enduring at the time. This was a contributing factor to the amount of suffering that the family was experiencing. Even though this was the case, the family went ahead and went through with the surgery that you outlined. Jessica's story sparked a wider discussion about the issue of missing white woman syndrome, which brought to light the fact that cases involving young white victims receive a disproportionate amount of attention. Jessica's story was the catalyst for this topic. The tale that Jessica told served as the impetus for this conversation. The circumstances that surrounded Jessica acted as the impetus for what we are currently discussing. The details of the events that surrounded Jessica's case were brought to light as a result of the attention that the media paid to the situation before it really took place. However, despite the fact that the public's focus on Jessica's narrative was initially motivated by genuine concern, it eventually evolved into a spectacle that occasionally diverted attention away from the pursuit of justice and made pre-existing disagreements within the community even more intense. Through the memorial sites that are available online and the ongoing efforts that are being made to memorialize Jessica's memory, it will be possible to ensure that her legacy will continue to be preserved for future generations. The fact of the matter is that this is the situation in spite of the difficulties and complexity that have been encountered up to this degree. The unexpected death of Lisa, Jessica's mother, in 2021 served as a sad reminder of the unsolved nature of the case and the ongoing grief felt by those who were left behind. Lisa's death was a dreadful reminder of both of these things. A death occurred in the year 2021 for Lisa. Despite this, the disagreement was not resolved satisfactory to any of the parties involved. 2021 was the year that Lisa passed away. She had a passing that occurred in that year. On the other hand, with regard to Jessica's case, The direction that the inquiry will go in the future is still completely unknown, and the journey toward justice is still ongoing. The reason for this is because the investigation is still being carried out. Therefore, in light of this, her family and the community as a whole are struggling with issues that have not been answered, but they continue to remain steadfast in their belief that they will eventually find a solution to the problems that they are facing. An entire neighborhood was devastated as a result of the horrific tragedy that took place in Cortland, and a family was left to suffer from an unspeakable loss that they had never before experienced in their life. This was something that they had never experienced before. Not only is it hard to avoid being moved by the calamity that occurred, but it is also impossible to avoid being impressed by it. Both of these things are impossible to avoid. Although we are getting closer and closer to the finish of the terrible story that Jessica Lane Chambers has been telling, it is impossible to resist being impacted by the catastrophe that has been going place in front of us. This is the case despite the fact that we are getting closer and closer to discovering the truth. The investigation into Jessica's case has not yet reached a conclusion, despite the fact that law enforcement has been working hard and has been relentless in their pursuit of justice. The investigation into her is still ongoing. As a consequence of this, there are still problems that have not been addressed, and as a consequence of this, a sense of disquiet has been left behind. When we think about Jessica's story and the effect that it has had on everyone who has been impacted by it, we are reminded of the precious nature of life and the significance of finding closure in the face of a calamity. This is because we are thinking about the impact that Jessica's story has had on everyone. In light of this, we are compelled to contemplate the relevance of locating a resolution. It is taking place at the same time that we are pondering the narrative that Jessica has to share with us. As a result of having met Jessica Lane Chambers, those individuals who had the good fortune to have known her will carry his legacy forward in their hearts for the rest of their lives. As a direct consequence of the tale that Jessica Lane Chambers has shared with the world, the lives of a significant number of individuals have been transformed in a variety of ways. When trying to count the number of people participating, it is tough to do so. Thank you for watching. I recommend our other crime videos.